Good evening, everyone. We're glad you're joining us in this third week as we reflect on Catholic women at work. So we're delighted to have with us two wonderful and very involved parishioners again with us this evening, Pilar and Tezi. We're going to do the same format that we did last week, where I'm going to talk first with Pilar for probably about 15 minutes or so. And then Ashley's going to talk with Tezi. And then for about the same length of time, and then we invite questions and comments and so on. And you're welcome to unmute as you ask your questions. You're welcome to put it in the chat if you don't want to ask your question and you want Ashley or I to pose the question or the comment. So any of those means works fine. We're going to begin this evening with a prayer that Pilar chose for us, and she is going to proclaim that prayer for us this evening. So Pilar, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anne.
Ashley, do you have the prayer to screen share?
I don't have the screen shared. Do you have it in front of you, Pilar? Do you want me to still read it? I'm sorry.
Yes, if you can go ahead and read it, Ashley,
Sorry,
please,
everybody.
I will be grateful, yes.
Yep. More than ever, I find myself in the hands of God. This is what I have wanted all my life from my youth. But now there is a difference. The initiative is entirely with God. It is indeed a profound spiritual experience to know and feel myself so totally in God's hands. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So it's my privilege to introduce Pilar Kent to you. Many of you know her. She is a catechist at Holy Trinity. She participates in the Icon Guild at Holy Trinity. So she's an icon writer, which I so admire. And it's such a prayerful, wonderful activity. So maybe we'll have time to talk a little bit about your icon writing as a source of spiritual nourishment for you, Pilar. Let me give you a little background on Pilar. Pilar was born in Bogota, Colombia, is Catholic educated, has studied economics and management studies. She's worked in various industries, including positions at IBM, the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Colombia's Institute of International Trade, Colombia Shipping Line, and an international law firm. She has conducted projects in trade facilitation, including institutional analysis and rationalization of Colombia's import procedures. And she's led projects to diversify Colombia's exports and open international markets for Colombian industries. She also founded the Research Center for Promotion and Advice, which was a group formed by young professionals from a variety of disciplines. And their purpose was to design and implement development strategies for marginalized areas in Colombia, especially in isolated Afro-American communities. She has her PhD from Erasmus University in Holland, where she completed her dissertation on institutional arrangements that affect free trade agreements, economic rationality versus interest groups. And as a result of her graduate research, she became known as a leading specialist on cross-border trade and the non-tariff barriers constraining trade movements. She's had opportunities at the World Bank, where she worked on a variety of international projects and has published extensively in trade and transportation journals. She's been an invited guest speaker in many venues, the Global Trade Analysis Project in Holland, International Trade Center in Geneva, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, International Trade Commission, the Inter-American Development Bank, and Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. I certainly know, and many of you know, Pilar from her involvement with the church. She is a deeply committed Catholic. She's trained in accompaniment of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And she's now, and I will just totally mess this up because I don't speak Spanish, Pilar, what you're participating in Barcelona. So you'll have to tell us about that. And then again, she serves as a catechist, and has served on parish council and the committees on Ignatian spirituality, development, and faith formation. So some of you also know her husband, Dr. Paul Kent. And before we let everybody into the Zoom room, we were talking about her beautiful daughter, Marie Claire, and that Marie Claire just got married this past year, which is a little surprising to me because I think of her as a teenager yet. So a lot of years just whipped on past me, and I didn't even realize what was happening. So welcome, Pilar. We're delighted that you can be with us in this this conversation this evening.
Thank you, Anne.
Pilar, tell us what you think has most kind of shaped your Catholic faith, and who's been part of that journey for you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Ashley. Before I answer your question, I want to thank also for all the participants today to come and join us in this conversation. And answering your question, I have to say that I owe to my parents the way we were raised and educated, and the schools they chose for us. I am the youngest of three. My two older brothers, they went to an ex-Jesuit school, someone called Teilhard de Chardin, and it was an ex-Jesuit from the director, the founder was from Barcelona. So it was kind of very scientific oriented Catholic school. And my school was created by two young Catholic, very well educated women that were Jesuit educated in La Javeriana, Bogota, which is the oldest Jesuit university outside Rome. They studied Lucia philosophy and Sylvia theology and arts, and they inherited their parents' country home. The father was a medical doctor, and I had the privilege to study with only 5 girls total, from first degree to 10th degree, all my elementary years. So it was like a club of learning, and we had the most beautiful classes of geography, history, sacred history, and religion. I will never forget that. And we did lots of arts, and every year we'll choose a subject and we'll work on that subject, history or geography or religion, and we'll it was like traveling, really, doing research and drawings of cultures. So that beautiful education, and my parents, hardworking, they were entrepreneurs. They own a small workshop of women couture. It was kind of high couture. It was beautiful business. They really promote textiles, handcrafts, beautiful things to do. They're a small business that had around 25 workers. They also own an extensive farm by the valley of the Magdalena River. So we were constantly inviting friends and cousins to come with us to our farm. Their hospitality was like second to none. So all those are memories that really shaped me and formed me and taught me who I am in many ways. Even the background for my career as economist, it was the table discussions about all the problems that they had as small entrepreneurs for importing machinery to have the raw materials, the difficulties for loan. The workers were like an extensive family for us. Very often we brought workers from the farm to be in Bogota because they had to go through a medical treatment sponsored by my parents. In those days, it was not social security or medical insurance, but my parents' generosity was recognized by all of them. So there are like wonderful memories of growing up and being educated in this high school. And then I passed to another high school, which was larger. I went from 5 girls to 35 girls. But it was a very good experience. And I was the one who said, I don't want to continue in the small class. I want to go to something bigger. And my mom said, well, that's your problem. You have to find the one you want. And I went to, that's my only connection to Ireland, to St. Patrick's School in Bogota. It was created by Emita Gaviria. Her husband was a very important politician, and Emita's father had been ambassador in Ireland. So they created St. Patrick's School. We had a very well-known priest who was our religion teacher. Later, he became Monsignor Sarmiento. So all those things made me in good basis as a, and of course, my family being Catholic, but no Catholic in the sense of Mass every Sunday. We missed many Sundays because we had to go to the farm, and it was like 5 hours drive in those days. And so it was not a big deal to miss Mass, but basically they were doers and they were doing the right things. So it was a kind of open-minded, but very Catholic. In the school, we had first Fridays confessions. We had retreats, many of them given by Jesuits. In those days, I didn't see the difference between having a retreat with a Jesuit or a retreat in another community. But all those were very important seeds in my education.
Yeah. So you already hinted at this a little bit in terms of your own kind of decisions around then future career steps, vocational steps. How did that sort of Catholic formation that you had help you make those decisions about what you wanted to do with your life, how you wanted to be, kind of live as a Catholic in the world and in the workplaces?
Well, I give credit to my parents that they trust us. They were kind of very open-minded. When I said I want to change my school, they said, okay, go ahead. And of course, it was another Catholic school. Then I went to a university that was not Catholic. We had La Javeriana, who had a very good department of economics, but Los Andes it was supposed to be the best, one of the best in Latin America. So I think for me, being Catholic is like in my DNA. It's part of my identity. I cannot think of myself being something else. I think faith has been really a grace given to me since I was little. I remember Sylvia teaching about the God, like that mystery, and for me was something like really will come like wonderful reality of being her child. So in a way, it gives you like a sense of purpose, a sense of beauty, a sense of doing things, and desire to see what is going on around, not only around my family and my school, but beyond that, and the countryside, and not everybody live as well as we can live in the city. So I was very young, really perceptive of those things. And I think in part is that culture. Colombia used to be a very Catholic country, and my family, they are part Antioqueños, part Bogotanos, and my grandmother lived with us all her life. That was my mom's mother. She was a very strong Catholic. She was like a constant teacher. We had in Colombia, you have service. So we had living service with us, and my grandmother was constantly teaching them to write, to read, make sure they had the sacraments. So all that happened like in my home. That answers the question?
Yeah, so, and I mean, in the work that you've done, and your career has been in economics and trade, international trade, and all of these things. How has your faith kind of, I guess, shaped the lens through which you look at those issues, right? Because you can do that work without a religious foundation, right? How do you think it is, how is being Catholic, having a faith life, kind of shaped how you've gone about the work that you do?
That's an interesting question. I was thinking of that. Well, I think vocation, when I decided to go to study economics at this university, which was non-religion whatsoever, one of the elective classes I could take was in faith, different faiths. And it was like a reaffirmation of being Catholic. And as economist, is a subject that can be very technical. If you see in economists, we pretend that we have a control of the variables. But I felt from the beginning that, and especially living in a house where we were seeing all the immense work of my parents and the workers and the difficulties about the import component of Colombian industry in those days, I could see the human factor, and it's like putting a soul into the subject, very cold, quantitative subject. And I think that sensitivity and perception of the human, we are not as rational as in economics you pretend to be. So I think that perspective as a Catholic gave me that sensitivity, which has been tremendously positive to do my work.
Thank you. What do you think has most challenged you in your work throughout your life as a person of faith? I mean, what have you come up against that has been particularly challenging for you?
I don't think the challenge has been for being Catholic, but I think being Catholic has like opened my eyes to see problems that in a way are not easy subjects, but I have been persistent in the subject. You can find some rejection. One of the examples was my dissertation when I did a PhD in economics, border crossing economics. You see the reality of the powerful interest groups, and before you defend a dissertation, you have to publish papers, and the papers were peer review, and you see the rejection and the rejection. I said, well, this is, but I'm not going to give up. The case study was NAFTA, US, Mexico and Canada. Now is the US, Canada, Mexico trade. But the analysis really put the human persons in the problem, and you could see the inequities of how big companies can cross border and how smaller have to wait for days, for weeks, and paying for unnecessary operations, making them even more difficult. And those papers were rejected here in the United States. Then the university in Europe decided to publish there, and they were accepted, and they flew very high because, well, for interest groups was not in their interest to publish the kind of problems that are there. Many is in their interest to maintain the clutter and the inefficiency because it's a money maker. So sometimes rationality intersects with the reality of how we human operate and manipulate. So, and those are things that I think is my Catholics faith, the human makes you to persist in your subject, because you know is the truth. You go to the bottom of the things. It's not like and I think that's faith is like a force. It's like you know, there is truth in something that you research, and the subject is important to bring it to light. You can negotiate, and maybe you can present the things in a way that are not going to be, this is, sometimes subjects can be delicate, so, but that doesn't change the truth. So being Catholic makes you sensitive and respectful, but above all, you go to the bottom of the things and you tell with all honesty what you find there. Especially when you are not doing the work for someone who is paying you. When you are a research, and I've been, since I came to this country, I have worked as an independent consultant. That gives me that freedom to, and I think it's part of being Catholic, that, hey, you need to.
And as you say, keeping the human at the center of things. So I have more questions for you, Pilar, but I'm going to give Ashley a chance to talk with Tezzy first, and then we'll loop back around and invite others. So thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. It's my privilege to welcome Teresita Schaffer. We call her Tezzy. Tezzy spent 30 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, culminating in 3 years as ambassador to Sri Lanka, with prior posts in Israel, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, as well as in the State Department. She retired from diplomatic service in 1997 and now teaches a course on diplomacy at Georgetown and serves as a senior advisor to McLarty Associates, a business consulting firm in Washington. She has a working knowledge of 6 languages and has written 3 books on India and Pakistan, 2 of them co-authored with her late husband, Howard Schaffer. She's also an invaluable member of the Holy Trinity Migrant Team. So welcome, Tezzy. We're glad to have you here with us. We'll start off with the same question we've asked all of our wonderful speakers. Could you share briefly about your Catholic formation and who was influential in your formation? You're muted, Tezzy.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I apologize again for zooming in late. My computer is new and was misbehaving. My parents were both Catholic, but my mother had converted from an Episcopal and Lutheran childhood. And they both took their religion seriously, but this probably wasn't something that would have been obvious to somebody who was sort of outside the religious context. And my mother, moreover, felt that being Catholic really had much more in common with her Protestant upbringing than most people in that day and that time would have said. So if I came home from school singing a chorale by Bach, which happened not infrequently, she said, "Oh, great, that's a heretic hymn." And that was kind of our private joke. I went to Sacred Heart schools in the US and in France, and had what I always considered to be the best possible Catholic school education. I went to a non-religious college, Bryn Mawr, and I got a good education in all of those places. The nuns at the Sacred Heart School certainly made sure we knew the basics and more. Compulsory philosophy classes in high school. I learned more about Aristotle than I learned with my compulsory philosophy class at Bryn Mawr some years later. So that was the beginning. A few months after I graduated from college, I joined the Foreign Service. And my religious formation had really nothing to do with that. 5 years after that, I got married. My husband, Howard, was Jewish and not particularly religious, but very much a believer in God. And he came to Mass with me for 46 years. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from my kids, but we'll get to that later. My professional life involved going overseas for somewhat more than half of my career. And Ashley has ticked off the places where I lived. And in each of these, I found things that were going to broaden and deepen my faith. In Tel Aviv, where my job, I had 4 different jobs when I was there, which was at that time a very common practice with new entrants to the Foreign Service. But what it also gave me was a crash course in Judaism, which was a fascinating series of insights into the origins of Christianity and the things that have carried over from Judaism to Christianity. I took Hebrew lessons at the embassy. My teacher was quite religious, and I remember asking her, we had just passed Pentecost, and we were coming up on the Jewish holiday, which for reasons that at that time I didn't have any understanding of, was translated as Pentecost. So I asked her, what was the reason, what's the background of this holiday for you? Because I've always thought of it as the ultimate Christian holiday. And she said, "Oh, why is that?" So I explained it to her. And she said, "Oh, well, there's an easy answer to that. Our Pentecost, which is also known as Shavuot, which means weeks, like 7 days to the week, is one of 4 pilgrimage holidays that were traditional times when Jewish people would try to go to Jerusalem. So when your apostles were holed up in the upper room and saw flames dancing on each other's heads, the reason there were all those people outside for them to talk to was that they'd all come up to Jerusalem to make the pilgrimage. I also got to visit the holy places. And I would say that was a rather contradictory set of lessons that I turned from that. One was that a lot of people get very proprietary about the holy places. And the best example of that was Palm Sunday Mass in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And there are 5 different Christian sects which divide up territorially the Holy Sepulchre among themselves. And the Latin Catholics, that's us, and the Greek Catholics had back-to-back altars. And I was told that Mass started at, I guess it was 10. Well, the Greek Catholics started at 9:30. And I have never before heard such competitive singing of our quite different hymns that we were singing for the Mass. On the other hand, that same afternoon was an inspiring example of holy places. This was the procession, the Palm Sunday procession down the Mount of Olives and into Jerusalem. And there were Christians from all over the Middle East. I, for no particular reason, happened to fall in step with a bunch of Catholic school children from Lebanon who were taught by French nuns. And I knew all the songs because of my year in France. But they were all people who wanted to be there as a demonstration of their faith. And they weren't competing with everybody else. It was one big happy family, a statement that one can't often make about different groups in the Middle East. My next post was in Pakistan. In Pakistan, the Catholic chapel, appropriately enough called the Fatima Chapel, was what I can only describe as an upper room. It was staffed by, the bishop of Karachi, who was a Goan Christian, a Goan Catholic, showed up from time to time. But there were missionary priests. One was from Ireland, and the other was from that part of the world, which is sometimes Italy and sometimes Austria. He spoke Italian, but considered himself Austrian. And unlike a lot of the missionary churches, this one was very low key, but really also quite an inspiration. The Italian-Austrian priest came to visit me when I had a baby in Islamabad, and he was obviously very frustrated that he was dealing with the expats because he had really come over to minister to the local Christians, but he didn't speak any Urdu, so he couldn't do that very well. We did occasionally go to the Urdu language Mass, which was in the evening, and it was a very downtrodden congregation. Most of the Christians there came from very low caste backgrounds. And we bring our kids. And the kids liked it because they got to sit away from us on a carpet right up near the altar. And we sat on cane stools at the back with the other adults. And the Urdu language Mass, the language of worship, was very Islamic, which is understandable when you understand that most of these people were converted from low-caste Hindu families. And they didn't know much about Christianity except that their holy day was Sunday instead of Friday. When I had the baby, my obstetrician, who was Muslim, whose daughter later married an Irish Catholic, whose son later married an Irish Catholic girl with 2 ceremonies, one of them at Holy Trinity, small world department. But she delivered me at home, and she raided the local hospital of their main maternity nurse, who was a Catholic. And her husband was a non-com in the Pakistan Army and had a toy store. He was retired from the military in the covered bazaar. And she talked about how she liked to make sure that the Catholic girls went into nursing because the Muslim girls looked down on nursing, too much contact with bodily fluids. But she knew it was an honorable profession, and so she wanted to make sure that her fellow Catholics got this opportunity. Next up was India. In India, the Catholics are much higher status than they are in Pakistan. And there were Indian ambassadors who were Catholic. Most of them had family ties to Goa. We tried out what most of the diplomats did, which was going to the Vatican embassy. And that was just a totally expatriate experience. And so our cook, who was a Goan Catholic, this is just the cook we inherited. This was just dumb luck. He was also a pretty good cook. But he said, why don't you come with us? And there was basically an Indian parish, which met in the basement of the meteorological department, which was not far from our house. And I think it was run by the Jesuits. But that was an Indian English language parish. And that was the first real experience I'd had of listening to the scripture in a developing country. And my kids told me later on that they liked going to church in these out-of-the-way places because the social relationships that they heard about in the scripture readings were so much like what we were living with. Next up, after a stay in Washington, was Bangladesh. And we went to church in the local seminary. And the church was staffed overwhelmingly by foreigners. There was one American, there was one Sri Lankan. There were a couple of other expats from other countries. The Sri Lankan was rather jolly. The American was quite serious, but he became a friend, and I still exchange Christmas cards with him. And my older son was confirmed in Bangladesh by a bishop named Theotonius Gomez, again, a Goan family. I volunteered to teach English to the seminarians, who it turned out were all converted from local low-caste Hindu families, and they all had two names. They had their Christian name, and they had their Bengali name, which was totally Hindu. That class was taught by a French priest, and I said, I wanted to, since I was giving them my time to teach them English, I wanted to take a class, and I asked to take a class in the prophets because they had one, and it was taught in English by this Frenchman. And that was wonderful. It certainly increased my knowledge of scripture. And my other Bangladeshi Christian experience was going to the wedding of the younger of my two gardeners who took care of the embassy residence garden, because my husband was the ambassador there. And there was big Cyprian and there was little Cyprian, and it was little Cyprian's daughter who was getting married. And I was invited to the wedding. So the ambassador's official vehicle drove me down to this place way out in the sticks. And as we approached the actual place where the wedding was taking place, there was a man with a yellow plastic rosary in his hand who was doing a dance. And someone whispered in my ear he was doing a very special dance to the Virgin Mary. And the term he used for the Virgin Mary was Shadu Mariam. Shadu is the Bengali word for holy. And the language of worship was very Hindu, because that was indeed the social background of the parents of the bride and groom. And all of the ceremonial was, again, very Hindu, lots of beautiful designs on the floor made out of flower petals. Last stop on my foreign service voyage was in Sri Lanka. And the church was, had both Sinhala language and English language masses. It had a congregation of mostly upper class Sri Lankans, plus the English-speaking expats. It had murals on the wall by an artist who was a disciple of George Keat, who I'm pretty sure was also Christian. But theologically, the church was straight out of the 50s. It was what I grew up with, before I turned 13. Very conservative. There were missionaries in Sri Lanka, and there had been a lot of Jesuit missionaries. When they were given to understand that if they went on home leave, their visas wouldn't be renewed, some of them opted to stay. And they were working mostly in the Tamil-speaking areas of the country. But the Christians, the Catholics, were about half Tamil and half Sinhalese. So they straddled both sides of the ethnic conflict. And there was a bishop when we met in Batticaloa, which was a city on the East Coast. He was himself Tamil, and he was trying heroically to create some kind of social contact between the two groups, which was very rare. And so I was invited to one of his peace meetings, where they struggled to have the proceedings take place in 3 languages, Sinhalese, Tamil, and English. I think he got credit all around for goodwill, but this was a case of the problem being a whole lot bigger than what one bishop of great goodwill could lift. The nuncio was a Frenchman, and as it turned out, he had been to the same political science school in Paris that I went to as a college junior, but at a different time. And he had all kinds of stories about the ill will between the Sinhalese and the Tamil Catholics. This was one of the thorns in his side. The church had gotten caught up in the ethnic conflict because, and the US was sort of caught up in this as well. The Voice of America, the official radio station of the US government, was building an updated transmission station. And the Catholics in Sri Lanka had decided that this was an affront to Sri Lankan sovereignty, and that they therefore had to protest it to show what good nationalists they were. This was the Sinhalese Catholics. And the local bishop had decided that he would take this on as a cause. And when I went up there to visit the transmission station, I sent him a polite letter asking if I could call on him, and he wouldn't receive me. I had deliberately not said anything about my religion because I thought that would be basically an invitation for him to see this as an affront. He decided to see it as an affront anyhow, and he had to have known because word gets around. So that was an unsuccessful effort at diplomacy. That's kind of the story of what I found as faith reinforcing events in my journey as a diplomat. And I will let you ask me about what interests you there.
Thank you, Tessie. That's fascinating. So against that same backdrop, I mean, those are wonderful examples of your faith and action that way. Were there times, experiences, or encounters that challenged you as a Catholic or challenged your faith?
Well, not so much in my overseas life, because there were plenty of things in my work where you could see that this wasn't exactly living the gospel. But what Pilar said about how economics is sometimes robbed of its human content, even though it is supposed to be about how people behave. My graduate study was in economics too, but I didn't get as far as you, Pilar. And so that was something you couldn't help being aware of. But what I have found challenging to my faith is birth control and taking the opposition to abortion to the extent of making it an issue for communion for people who have are in favor of separating religious and secular law on that subject. I think that our hierarchy has let itself get too far sucked into the politics there. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I know I'm in ample company, and I keep on keeping on because the big things about my faith, as I understand it, start with the recognition that God is so much bigger than we are, and that there's lots that we can't really understand, except for the importance of God's love and God's mercy, which is one of the reasons that I like this parish.
I can't believe it. I just looked at the time. So this has been so fascinating to have you, but these go faster and faster every week. So let me ask both of you this question, because I know personally that you guys are doing various projects here and outside of Holy Trinity. How are you engaged in your faith life today?
Oh, well, that is why I volunteered to take part with the migrant team. I had retired from the Foreign Service 25 years ago, and my husband died 5 years ago. I'm still teaching, I'm still active professionally, but it doesn't really fill up my time, and I thought I needed to be doing something that would help make life better for some people. And the migrant team appealed to me because they were clearly so active and had a very well-organized program, so that I wouldn't be feeling like I was just trying to be Lady Bountiful. These were people who needed help. It was a well-run program to provide it. And when you talk about a preferential option for the poor, this is certainly one of the ways in which you can try to put that into action. Somebody asked in the chat about the Catholic Church's teachings on the poor. The teachings are good. They are insufficiently put into practice, and that's what I was trying to do.
Pilar, do you want to comment on, because I was thinking as you were sharing the stories of your youth and formation in that regard of of art while you were learning religion and history and geography and knowing what you do with the Iconography Guild. So can you maybe share a little bit about how you're living your faith out today?
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Tessie. Now I recognize you. Of course, I remember we had a retreat, Ignatian retreat, years and years ago. I met you when the retreats were outside Holy Trinity, a weekend retreat. And I'm fascinated to hear your stories and in India and all those fascinating places. I had the opportunity to go to those countries, but a totally different story, because I was a student in England, and many of my friends from studies were from India, and they were in high positions doing also masters, and they invited me, come and visit us in India. So I had the opportunity to travel and visit some of them. One particularly family in Bombay, they were Catholic, and their hospitality, honestly, I felt like at home being with them in their country. Actually, going back to the question, as a Colombian and very Jesuit spirituality oriented, I continue participating and contributing through grants that we give to pay for the education of economically not very bright students that cannot pay the tuitions for the school or the universities. This is done through Jesuits in Bogota, in San Ignacio de Loyola. And here in Holy Trinity, that was like home for me. When I married in San Ignacio, Bogota, by a very dear Jesuit with my lovely husband, Paul, for me, the obvious place was to go to Sunday's Mass. First, we went to Georgetown. We stayed in Georgetown for years and years until our daughter, Marie Claire, who was being prepared for confirmation, said that she didn't like the religious education program here in Fairfax Station. I have had the blessing of having a spiritual direction since I'm very young in Colombia, Jesuit. So here in Georgetown, I had a very dear friend who was my spiritual director, and he became like a father and grandfather for Marie Claire here in Washington. And when she said that, then we joined Holy Trinity for the religious education program. So that's when I started coming to Holy Trinity, and they always were asking for catechists, and said, I can do that. I had this wonderful experience in Colombia. So I started in 2008, and Marie Claire graduated and left, and I still do it. And every year is a discernment, and I decide to continue. And having celebrated the 500 years of Ignatian year last year, and the apostolic preferences given by the Jesuits are accompanying the youth in faith formation. So I'm very pleased to be there. The spiritual exercises of San Ignacio. I find myself, and one of the reasons why I chose the prayer that you beautifully read is that I really find that things start coming like from God's will. Some years ago, I talked to Martina, my desire to take the training to accompany in the spiritual exercises. But then I saw that you had to be in the classes for a number of days a week, and we travel a lot. We continue doing consulting assignments, and we travel. And of course, I love to go to Colombia at least once or twice a year. So I decided it was not the time. Then COVID comes, and I got an invitation by Jesuits in Colombia, the Center of Ignatian Reflection and Advice, an invitation to apply and have the interviews required to be accepted in the program. So I took the 1 year, so I was formed to give the exercises. And Jesuits in Barcelona, they are running a it's called el Programa de Profundización para Acompañamiento. It's amazing the amount of material and the reading of the Spanish original of Ignatius, what that means today. It's exactly the same, but with the more we know, the more we can do with those exercises. So that is, for me, has been an absolutely companion since I was very young. When I returned from Europe, my father died of a sudden heart attack 3 months later. That really gave me, it was a heartbroken, and I asked my teacher of religion in who was Monsignor Sarmiento. So he advised me to speak with a Jesuit who was giving the exercises. And he said, well, I'm giving exercises to the nuns of the Sacred Care, but if you want to come. So since very young, I've been very close to the Jesuits and having that blessing of accompaniment, spiritual accompaniment. So I find my life dedicated in a balanced way, family, Marie Claire, but also being able to give back through the faith formation for the children for all these 15 years, the contribution, of course, to the parish and to Colombia, who is, we are very generous. In this country, I find the people of this country very, very generous, and the churches have beautiful programs. In Colombia, they struggle for people to give money. It's a totally different story there. So for us, it's a joy to be able to contribute also in Colombia, which is a third world country with lots of problems. So I do my best.
No, you are very involved. We're grateful to both of you. It's 6:30, but I want to, before everyone tries to sneak off for dinner, maybe your ending advice could be, what would you say to young women today who may be struggling to stay engaged with the Catholic Church?
Do you want me to go?
Or you can go first. Yeah.
Okay. I encourage, be authentic, find yourself, really. These young people, they are profoundly intelligent, and they are very sensitive to, as we call in Barcelona in Spanish, they say we are in liquid times. Liquid times means things are not as solid as they used to be. So the acceptance of people as they are is incredible. And they are very sensitive to the story of slaves and the story of, so I encourage them to find their authentic selves and let the Holy Spirit to lead them. Many of these young people don't even come to Mass anymore, but it's hopeful. They are, I think we need to listen to them very attentively, because as Catholic who loves the Church, I see the need of change. So that dialogue has to be not only of people within the Church, but is listening to those who for good reasons, are not even coming to the church these days. So I am hopeful.
Thank you. Tezzy?
Could I add something to that?
Yes, please.
I have two sons, and one of them is still Catholic. He's married to a woman who is half Colombian. And the other, who lives here in Washington, gave up on religion. After my husband died, Mike, the one who had given up on religion, out of the kindness of his heart, offered to take me to Mass a couple of times. And as we were coming out of church one of these times, one person came up to me and said hello, and somebody else invited me to dinner, and we walked quietly to the car, and he said, "I didn't realize that you had an actual community here." And I thought he had finally figured out, even if he wasn't coming back, and hasn't so far, he had finally understood why I was there.
Well, it's 6:33, so thank you both so much for being a part of the series. I respect both of you immensely, and it's been wonderful to hear your faith stories tonight. We're grateful that you were willing to share them. I know Pilar said that she does, and I'm sure Tezzy does too, teaching in Georgetown. Easy to talk in front of groups about all kinds of things, economics, diplomacy, but it is harder to kind of share yourself in this way and to talk about yourself. So it is a true gift to our community, and we're grateful. We have one more series next week. We are welcoming Donna Casada, who is a journalist, and Gail Louie, who's a relationship manager at PNC. And then just a reminder that on the 20th, Anne is having an in-person reflection. And if you've seen the emails about that, we've asked you to register so that we know what to expect. So that's it. That's a wrap. Thank you both so much. And I hope that we'll see you next Monday.
Thank you very much, Ashley.
Thank you,
all.
Ashley. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Pilar.
Thank you, Anne.